Ow! Matthias cried, rubbing his head. Emil's hands flew back up to his mouth once again as more laughter overtook him. Shut up, Emil! Matthias lashed out. Leave Emil alone. It's not his fault that you have no tact, Bervold said, covering up a small smile himself. Tino looked frightened and had instinctively grabbed onto Bervold's sleeve. Don't worry, Tino, Lucas assured, placing the spoon back onto the table and taking his own seat beside Matthias. I'm not a violent person, but sometimes Matthias needs keeping in line. The merman swallowed and inched as close to Bervold as he could manage. It's all right, Tino, Bervold said softly to him, gently patting the slender fingers on his sleeve. No one's going to hurt you. Tino looked skeptical. In fact, he looked so scared that even Matthias chipped in, trying to put him at ease. Don't worry about it, Tino. Really. Lucas doesn't go around hitting people, just me. And only when I've said something really stupid. Lucas raised his eyebrows and looked at Matthias. That might be the most mature statement I've ever heard you make. Then he turned and smiled at the merman. You're a good influence, Tino. Tino gave a hesitant smile back and relaxed into his seat, letting go of Bervold. In my home, male couples still have a wife, he explained hesitantly. Mer people allow male couples? Emil asked. Wow, so cool. Tino looked curious by this question. Why wouldn't we? So, the one considered the wife in a male couple isn't defined by size then? Lucas asked, interested in glancing with a smirk at Matthias. Otherwise you might have thought I was the wife instead. But no, even with big, strong Matt here, you thought he was the... Before Tino could answer, Matthias cut him off. Let's dig into this breakfast, huh? The grumbling man reached for the nearest dish. Knowing that this was a purposeful distraction from the subject at hand didn't really bother them. They all began to make their sandwiches with the cold cuts, cheese and vegetables, passing the items around as they needed them. Bervold squeezed his beloved roe-past over his sandwiches, but the others avoided it. Lucas began serving their omelettes and porridge, each man passing his plate and bowl to him in turn. After seeing how it was done, Tino eagerly handed over his own plate for Lucas, and when he received it back, he lifted it to his face and took a long inhale of the omelette steam. He jerked back, surprised. It's hot. Of course it is, Matthias said. That's how they're served. Tino looked at him blankly. I guess you can't cook under the Baltic Sea, can you? Lucas questioned, spooning a little oatmeal into his brother's bowl. Cook? Tino asked, sounding out the word very carefully. Thought not, Lucas responded. Don't worry about it. Let's finish our meal, then we'll start explaining what we can. I hope you like the food. Tino watched them all for a while instead of eating right away. He studied how they held their forks and spoons for the hot food, and how they were eating their sandwiches, made up of so many different pieces. Bervold was not oblivious to the fact that Tino ended up focusing intently on him in the end, so he moved slowly, spearing his omelette with his fork deliberately, before raising the morsel to his mouth. He did the same with the spoon and his oatmeal, after dropping a handful of berries into it. Tino finally followed suit, clumsily cutting at his omelette and taking his first bite of human food. He chewed for a moment, and then his eyes went wide and he chewed more quickly and swallowed. Instantly, he scooped up more with his fork and began eating like he was under a time limit. Whoa, slow down there, Matthias said around his own mouthful. It's not going to expire, you know. Tino ignored him, wolfing down the food like he couldn't get enough. He must like your cooking, babe. I'm flattered, but he's probably so hungry because he hasn't eaten in so long, at least since yesterday. I'm curious if he's ever had anything besides fish, Emil wondered, as he fastidiously cut up his own omelette. As eager as he was, Tino was dropping a lot of food from his fork and seemed to be getting frustrated. If you want to just use your hands to eat, Lucas told him finally, that's alright with us. We don't want you to hurt yourself. Tino put down his fork at once and picked up a piece of bread from the plate nearby with his hands, tearing into it with his teeth. As he chewed vigorously, he pointed eagerly to the rest of the food on the table. Try anything you want, Lucas said encouragingly. I like fish myself, but I imagine it gets old after a while. Tino shrugged and reached for the cold cuts. Each new bit of food he tried seemed to make his eyes widen more than the last. He enjoyed the meat, cheeses, and breads the most, but still seemed to like the vegetables and porridge. The roe, however, sent his eyes watering and his lips twisting up at the utter saltiness of the flavour. Bervold had to remind him he had a cup of water if he needed it. Tino drained it quickly, washing the saltiness away. Emil commented on how he thought being in salty water his entire life would have braced him for the taste. Lucas had to remind him that the Baltic Sea was nowhere near as salty as roe paste. Somewhere in the midst of his food discoveries, Tino seemed to notice the mugs of coffee beside the other men's plates. He pointed at Bervold's and cocked his head. I don't know if you'll like coffee, Lucas said quickly. It's pretty bitter, especially how Bervold drinks it. Tino looked disappointed. But I can make it with milk and a lot of sugar like Emil's. That makes it sweet. Tino nodded excitedly, taking another bite. I think he's going to want to try everything that he can regardless, Emil said with a small chuckle. Lucas agreed, and got up to make Tino his doctored coffee. So, did you only eat fish, or did you, slay dolphins and stuff? Matthias asked Tino. The merman didn't answer at once, too busy sampling the cucumbers. A moment later, however, he swallowed and said, Fish? Seagrass? Starfish? He paused and concentrated before apparently giving up. There is much food in the sea, but nothing that tastes like this. Well, you don't have wheat or sugar, Emil pointed out. Those are just some of what makes our food taste so good. Yeah, wait until you taste cake, Matthias said excitedly. And chicken, pork, rice, cookies. Aw, man, you're in for a treat. There's so much food from all over the world for you to try. Tino all but bounced in his seat at that prospect, smiling around a huge mouthful that swelled his cheeks. When he swallowed, he asked, The world? Oh dear, Lucas said, coming back with Tino's coffee and hearing that question. I didn't think of that, Matthias worried. He has no idea what the Earth even is. I do, Tino protested. Earth is the surface, where you grow your trees and crops? Technically, you're right, Emil said, but it's much more than that. It's the planet, Tino gabbled out, looking proud of himself. They looked at him in astonishment for a second. How'd you know that? Emil asked for all of them. Long story, Tino answered. But I've never seen the planet. Can you show me? Let's save the education for after the meal, Lucas said, placing the coffee before Tino. For now, you're having enough just eating breakfast. Here, give it a try. Excitedly, Tino took the mug and cautiously sniffed at the scent wafting up from the coffee. He hummed in delight and sipped slowly. He looked unsure at first, but then he took a few more sips and then smiled, nodding his head in approval. Emil, you have a new decaf sugary coffee, buddy, Matthias laughed as Tino began to slurp at the coffee. Don't let any of that come out of your gills, Emil warned. Oh yeah, your gills, Matthias said at once. Why the hell do you still have gills if you're a human now? Tino ran his fingers down the side of his slender neck. When I return to the sea, I have to be completely under the waves at some point to change back. Have to breathe somehow. I see, Lucas said, intrigued. So you retained some of your mer features even though you look completely human. Was wondering about that, Bervold said. You make those sounds that we can't. Tino nodded, and just for emphasis, gave a long trilling sound from his throat. His lips barely moved at all, yet the sound rang out clear and beautiful. For when I need them to fetch me. Lucas, Matthias, Bervold and Emil all stared at their surprised houseguest in awe after hearing such an unearthly sound. They had all seen otherworldly things before, but that didn't stop them from marvelling over each new one they witnessed. "Totes amazing," Matthias said a second later. Tino smiled widely at him. Thank you, Matthias. What is totes? It's slang, you know, a shorter way of saying a longer word. So I said totes instead of totally. Totes. Tino tried a few times, then seemed to be trying to remember something. Totes freaking sweet? Not a single one of them could keep from chuckling or smiling at this. "Oh my god, this kid," Matthias declared, laughing. "This kid is the best." Tino tilted his head, puppy-like, and waited for the all-round laughter to die down before asking. "Kid means child. Am I child to you? How old are you all?" "It might be better to ask you that first," Lucas suggested. "That way we have an idea of whether you'd be a kid to us. How old are you?" 27 summers. Matthias's jaw dropped, and he pointed at Tino with his spoon. "No fair at all. He's got a baby face," he exclaimed, sounding a little upset. When Tino looked concerned at this outburst, Emil explained. "You're a year older than him, but you look like you're my age." And how old?" "I'm 19. Tino smiled sweetly at him and pursed his lips a bit. "You're the child." Emil's face dropping into a very long, suffering expression at the words, but Matthias grinned deviously. "Even the merman who's barely been on land for a whole day knows where you stand, Emil," he chided, waving his spoon tauntingly in the air. "Lowest in the ranks." A sudden hiss startled them all. The sound was raw and ferocious, and Tino's pretty face turned ugly when he drew back his lips to make it. The unsettling sight only lasted a split second before Tino was merely frowning again. "Children, kids, are important," he insisted, his voice louder than they had heard before. That is if they didn't count the screaming from the previous night. Emil and Lucas's eyebrows lifted at this, seeing how stern Tino looked. Matthias certainly wasn't laughing anymore, and Bervold seemed a bit concerned under his neutral face. The merman shot Matthias a look that didn't seem upset, so much as disappointed. He then leaned toward Emil across the table and seized his hand, squeezing it for emphasis. "Without children, we have no future. They're precious and Tino huffed a bit angrily as he struggled to form the word. They all respectfully waited until he blurted, "Invaluable!" There was an awkward pause before Tino seemed to realize that he had raised his voice, and he withdrew his arm back again, ducking his head as if in silent apology. "Better listen to him, Matthias," Bervold said, breaking the silence in a slight tease in his voice. "Or I won't be the only one hitting you for picking on Emil." For once, Matthias didn't say anything. He just pouted, stuffing another bite into his mouth to avoid having to talk. There was another few seconds of uncomfortable silence before Tino muttered, "Sorry for my outburst. Chill. Kids are special to me." "Don't sweat it," Emil said, holding his head a little higher. "I'm going to like having you around." "Seconded," Lucas said quietly, hiding a small smile. "Seconded," Matthias mocked in the teeniest of whines. Lucas gave him a little kick under the table. Tino smiled at the interaction, then looked up at Bearvold curiously. You're... how old? He inquired, being cautious as though afraid to insult him, as he might have done to Emil. I'm 30. I'm the oldest. His face brightening, Tino seemed happy to have guessed right. He then glanced at Lucas. 28, the man said at once, while Tino was opening his mouth to ask. I have to say, you do look a lot younger than 27. Tino smiled politely. Thank you. Can I... Sheepishly, the merman presented Lucas with his empty plate. Wordlessly, Lucas served him another helping of everything. This prompted all of them to get their second servings as well. They were all glad to be able to focus on their food to help gloss over the awkward interaction about children. Tino, apparently satisfied with the discussion of their ages, went right back to eating as much as he could with his hands, only using his fork and spoon for the messier foods. He continued to slurp his coffee happily, and enjoyed his water just as much. No one commented on Tino's bad table manners. It wouldn't benefit anything at this point. Instead, they just enjoyed watching him revel in the new tastes. When they all seemed to come to a stopping point, Tino gave a big sigh and rubbed at his slightly bulging belly. Full, he declared happily. That's good, Bearvold agreed from beside him, handing him a napkin. Tino looked at it blankly. For your face. Tino didn't say anything in response, just looked confused. His tongue slipped out and swiped at what it could reach, as if to ask what else could possibly be needed. Bearvold took the direct approach then, reaching out to tip Tino's chin up, holding it in place as he wiped at the mess on it and around the merman's mouth. At first, Tino had tensed up, but quickly relaxed once he realized what Bearvold was doing. Bear the mother hen strikes again, Matthias said, whimsily returning to his voice. Bearvold didn't apologize for his behavior, just finished up and nodded his approval at Tino's now clean face. What's a hen? Tino asked. It just means he's protective and caring, Lucas provided. Bearvold does tend to baby us when he feels we need it. Hen, Tino repeated to himself. Then he smiled at Bearvold. Hen? Emil was stifling a giggle as Bearvold's eyes widened in surprise. Yeah, he answered Tino. Funny word, Tino said, before he gave a slight shiver, and suddenly pulled Bearvold's sweater on again, sinking into its softness. Let's clear the table, and then we need to have a talk, Lucas announced.